All right. Next up, we have, I don't know if you guys know Sophia. She is a Dup15q board member, but she's also the director of patient advocacy at Lundbeck. And she's going to talk about a clinical trial that's not specific to Dup15q, but rather overall for people with epilepsy. So, Sophia, take it away.
Thanks. I will preface, I'm about 6 months pregnant, so if I'm out of breath, bear with me. It's probably been the biggest symptom outside of pregnancy fog. But yeah, I'm super grateful to be here. Thank y'all for having us. It's been such a great conference already. Last or Nashville was my first one, but as Mike said, I do our community engagement and advocacy with Lundbeck, formerly with Longboard. And today I'll be talking a little bit about bexicaserin. So it's a bit different than, oh, do I have a little, oh, I do. A clicker, but it's a little different than what we've been talking about earlier today with ASOs. So this particular investigational therapy or medicine that we're looking into is what we're calling a small molecule. So it is something that isn't hyper-specific to Dup15q, but what we think will end up, oh, thank you. What we hope to see help people with something called, thank you, developmental and epileptic encephalopathies, which is just a mouthful to say you have developmental delays or plateauing are caused by seizures. So if you see that, and we just call it DEEs because sometimes, it feels like a tongue twister. So, like I mentioned, we started out as Longboard, but Lundbeck recently acquired Longboard later in the year, last year. And so we're excited to be now a part of the Lundbeck family. I'll quickly go over. We're in the neuro rare space, about like 15 years ago now. And so they're really excited to be back in the community. They were originally brought Sabril and Onfi to the market. And so, yeah, so that's just a little bit about them. They're Danish. They're very nice, very dedicated people. They have a based in Chicago, but I can say after being there for a few months now, everybody is really dedicated and really excited to be hopefully bringing something, a new treatment option for people. So this is another kind of mouthful slide, but we'll break it down. So bexicaserin, which is just the name of the treatment, is an investigational oral superagonist of the 5-HT2C receptor, an important regulator of inhibitory neurotransmission. So like, what? Essentially, bexicaserin is hyperspecific to one of the serotonin receptors. And so we know that there's, many serotonin receptors. We think of SSRIs or what have you, but this particular one, we think affects the GABAergic nerve. So in GABA, we think of as the brakes for excitatory activity. And we, think that this particular medicine will help up the brakes and slow down that excitatory activity, which will help seizure control. And that's why also, we think this is something that will help a broad swath of individuals and not just, again, specific to any one community, whether it's Dup15q or some of our monogenetic communities. So essentially, we've heard a lot today about all of the incredible work that goes into developing some of these treatments and therapies. We have the animal models and we have all of the toxicology studies and preclinical work. The team who discovered this had been working on it for about 20 years, and so we'll talk a little bit about today about the phase 3 program. So again, that's just a little bit about the medicine itself or a potential treatment. So again, this was our phase 1/2. So sometimes in clinical trials, you can combine that first phase 1 study with a phase 2 study if there's a high need for a community and a community that doesn't have very many treatments available to them. And so that's what we did about 2 years ago now. And this is just the example of we went ahead and said, well, look, we think, again, because the small molecule medicine, we know that there are a lot of medicines that people use that aren't necessarily dedicated to one specific group. Many people take a medicine maybe for Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, but may not have Lennox-Gastaut. So can't we see, if we take these DEEs, or these seizures and developmental delays, communities, and see if that will also show improvements or clinical responses to certain treatments? And so our phase 2, this is something very common that you'll see, and hopefully see more of as more companies are starting to be involved with Dup15q. It's just kind of the schema or the plan of the phase 2 of what they call it. So essentially, there's a set criteria. So we have to make sure that when people enroll in a clinical trial, we have a baseline that's similar to compare it to. And so for this particular study, it was a baseline of 4 countable motor seizures within a 4-week period. And there there had to be a developmental plateauing or delay. Traditionally, and typically what you'll see in a phase 2 also, is there will be older individuals enrolling in that clinical trial. So for us, we had individuals from the ages of 12 to 65 enroll in the clinical trial, and we were located in the United States and Australia. Again, it was really important for us to see, that efficacy and that safety. I feel like those have been the 2 theme words of any kind of treatment talk this week. And so what we went ahead and saw, which I believe is the next slide, was that these groups did have comparable responses. The other thing that you'll see, and this is our example, so anytime in a clinical trial that you participate in, anything that goes awry, or any kind of little, if it's acid reflux, or you see changes in your loved one, that's something that we need to report as a company, because we need to make sure that is that something that potentially this treatment is causing as a side effect, or is it something that we're seeing as what we just would think of as daily life. So anything that happens during any clinical trial, not just this one, but anyone that you go into, will capture some of these safety reports. And so this is the safety component of the safety and efficacy. And so for the most common, they're called adverse events. Adverse events that we saw were somnolence, a decrease in appetite, constipation, and diarrhea. So very common things. I think we just heard from even the last presenter, right? We know that is pretty common across our DEEs and our neurodevelopmental communities. And so, we saw the highest one was the somnolence and the sleepiness that comes, with taking the medicine. What ended up, that particular event that we saw traditionally happened with an up titration of the medicine. So instead of doing a 2-week period, when we went ahead and progressed into the trial, we extended it for an extra week to see if that helped, and we're rushing necessarily that titration, and we ended up seeing that brought that somnolence and sleepiness down. So it's also why it's really good to be able to report these things, because it also helps us understand maybe where we can fix and treat and toggle with the trial itself. And so this is the efficacy part. And so seizure reduction, RCT, if you ever see that, is just a randomized control trial. And OLE is just an open label extension. And so the randomized control trial is just the trial itself, and the open label extension is really important. So you'll see it again, not only in our clinical trial, but in many clinical trials that'll offer it. It's that extended period of time after the randomization of placebo arm and people on treatment, where everybody is enrolled onto that open label extension. And really what that does is it allows us to see an extended period of that safety and that efficacy, just to make sure that we are really capturing long-term use, or as long as we can term use. And so we saw in the treatment arm, you'll see the dotted lines that'll represent that time and period. a reduction in seizures. But then you'll also see in the solid line that the placebo arm met where the treatment arm was in that open label extension. And so that was really promising for us and something we were really excited about, enough to bring us to a phase 3 clinical trial program today. So this is our global phase 3 program. We have 2 different arms, but today we'll focus on our deep ocean. As Longboard, as you might be able to kind of put together, loves a good ocean and marine pun. So we went with deep ocean, deep sea. Some people call that deep Olay, just like for giggles. But that's our open label extension. And so really, we are going to be looking at, again, about 320 individuals for this deep ocean study, which will encompass our DEEs. And so, again, if you have 4 countable motor seizures within a 4-week period, and then a developmental plateauing or delay, that's what we're defining as a DEE for this intents and purposes. Our primary endpoint, so because this is an anti-seizure medication, our primary endpoint is a countable motor seizure, which we'll define in a slide or two. And part of the reason that we use countable motor seizures is because we can call those discrete events and then be able to use those as measurements to see improvements later on. This time, because it's a phase 3 and it's much larger, we'll be able to actually go down to the age of 2 all the way up through 65. And we are aiming for, I actually think that that's 110 sites now globally, and we'll be in about 20 countries by the end of the study. So we're very excited to make this almost as accessible as possible for families. So this is the slide where we talk a little bit about the different groupings. You can just stay in the blue kind of zone for this. So the way we're defining DEE is seizure onset before the age of 5. And the seizure types on there, you obviously can read all of this, but it's general tonic-clonics, tonic-clonics, atonics with focal into motor. So it's a pretty broad swath of what we're saying as countable motor seizures. And then for our LGS arm, it's just seizure onset before the age of 8, same kind of seizure type across the board. And so big takeaway for this is, if you have one or the other, don't worry about it. If your clinician will work to figure out kind of your Harry Potter sorting hat of where you would go. Great. And so this is our map again, right? So this is what the phase 3 looks like. So part of the screening period is just making sure that the baseline, when you come in, you have those 4 countable motor seizures. So don't stress if you don't have a seizure diary on hand or you don't have something readily available. We'll use that time period to really make sure that that criteria is met. You would go and you would talk to your clinician and talk to the site. And then after that screening period is over, you would go into the titration period, which again, we saw needs to be 3 weeks. So we went ahead and extended it to 3 weeks. And then after that, you go into this, what we call maintenance period, which is just the clinical trial itself. And there's a randomization of a 1-to-1 ratio between individuals who receive bexicaserin and then individuals who receive placebo. I will say, for the most part, part of the criteria that we are allowing for the study is that we are allowing for up to 4 additional anti-seizure medications. And really, we wanted to make sure that we weren't tinkering too much with what families were already on, particularly because there's that placebo component. And we do view this as an additional medicine if it so seems effective. After that 12-week period is over, you have the option, if you feel like this has been beneficial for you and your loved one, to either continue into the study, into that open label extension for that extended safety and efficacy period, and review, but also have the option, of course, at any point, really, to roll off of the clinical trial. Cool. So again, one of the things that I'm really proud of, and I want to give flowers back to the community, but we know that clinical trials are kind of a pain to get to, and we know that it's a lot of work for y'all to participate in these. And so because of the work that I think we've talked about this whole week, whether or not it's a natural history study or the registry itself, we were really able to call on a lot of our community partners to identify different clinical trial sites that were either, readily accessible or places that you all were already seeking treatment. And so if you doubled up on, visiting your neurologist that happened to be in the same site as where we were running the clinical trial, that was something that we tried to really accommodate. So there's about 30 sites within the United States, and then a whole slew of countries, 19, if my math is mathing, on the right-hand side there. And so those will be rolling out as we continue to work with each of the different regulatory bodies. But I also know that this has been quite a conference. You guys have gotten a ton of information. And so if you really remember anything, this is just the website that you can always go to. So in the United States, we have a pre-screener on our website that you can go ahead and put in your information or your loved one's information. And it will trigger somebody to reach out to you to walk you through kind of that screening process. So you literally don't have to remember much of what I've said here today other than this website. And then this email address is also a great resource for y'all to have as well. So if there are any questions, if you go home and you're like, what the heck was that lady talking about? And you just remember this, somebody will respond to you. So yeah, that's everything. But I just want to say thank you so much again. And many of the decisions that we were able to make were, as we were crafting kind of what we were hoping was accessible, we pressure tested against people like Mike, like Jackie, like Dylan, like the board of Dup15q, and they really were great advocates on your behalf to really represent and recognize what reality looked like. So I know the ask to participate in research has been a lot, but I hope you can see more trials and companies using this to benefit you all in the long run. So thank you. Yeah. And if anybody has questions, cool.
Hi, just a quick question.
Yeah.
Is it an oral tablet and is it crushable?
It is a liquid.
Oh, okay.
And it is cherry flavored, but also keto friendly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Cool. And I'll have an oversized t-shirt if anybody has any questions. I'll be running around. So thank you all.